And let's see. Well, I don't know. There we go. My computer is finally telling me that we're recording, so we're recording. So here we go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for showing up for another one of my interviews. As you can see from the background behind me, I'm in a different venue than normal. I'm not at our Scranton House location with its excellent internet near our church. I'm actually on our Catholic worker farm, and the internet here is very sketchy. So we'll see how long this little experiment lasts. But now that it's lambing season and the beginning of planting and stuff, I would like to be here on the farm more than in my squalid little digs in Scranton. So we'll see how this goes. But anyway, today I'm excited. I'm going to continue, at least at the beginning here, with our conversation about Catholic education. And I'm excited today to have my old dialogue partner, Kale Zelden, here with me. Kale is usually interviewing me, and he's interviewed me maybe 5 or 6 times over the past year and a half. Kale works with Rod Dreher and does his podcast, a thing called General Eclectic, a name that I really like. Kale is also the chair of the humanities department at Portsmouth Abbey School in Rhode Island, Portsmouth, Rhode Island. And that includes, philosophy, history, literature. So Kale wears a lot of hats. Where'd you get your degrees? I forgot.
Yeah. So, first of all, it's great to be here on your show with you, Larry. I miss our conversations. It's been a several month layoff, but it's great to have you here. So anyway, my background. So I did an undergraduate degree in literature with a minors in philosophy and political science at Thomas More College in Merrimack, New Hampshire. Then I went back home. I'm from Louisiana. I went back home and I got my master's degree at Louisiana State University in English. And so, so that's the formal education.
Go Tigers, LSU, yeah. And is that how you got to know Rod Dreher? Because you're both from Louisiana?
Well, yeah, it's sort of funny. I read, like many people, I guess, I read Rod before I knew Rod. As a kid, I was very much into movies and music and that sort of thing. And when I was in late high school, the local movie reviewer was one Rod Dreher. It was one of his first post-college gigs. And so I would read him every Friday morning in the fun section for all his movie reviews. And I had kind of followed him that way. And we knew mutual people, but I did not meet him there. He moved off, as you know, and wound up in the New York Post, et cetera, and then eventually National Review. I started reading him in the National Review on the corner primarily, and then a couple of times corresponded with him when he was writing Crunchy Cons.
That was my first introduction to Rod, was Crunchy Cons. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was really taken with that idea because that sort of spoke to me. And I always felt a little bit of an odd duck conservative because I didn't sort of like look the part or feel the part exactly. Of a late 80s, early 90s Republican. It just didn't ever quite suit. I don't know. Anyway, and I struck up a conversation, an ongoing conversation with him then. And then just over the years, my mom and dad live in Baton Rouge. And so anytime that I go back home to Baton Rouge, we would meet up, go out to eat, talk, that whole thing. So that's how it all started.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
And that's how your association with Rod. And of course, I want to alert my viewers too, before we launch into our conversation today, to the fact that Kale has started a Substack that I was just reading last night and this morning for the first time. It's called The Underneath, a title. Wasn't that a movie?
After I titled the Substack and I submitted it, I said, well, I probably should do a Google search of it, and lo and behold, it is in fact a movie. I have not seen the movie, so I can't say that was the inspiration behind.
Okay, that was my question. Is it the inspiration behind it? But anyway, I highly encourage my viewers to go and access Kale's Substack, which is free, called The Underneath. It's got a little edgy to it. The first couple I read were all about essentially the importance of spirit, which I want to talk about here soon, and how you use Charles Taylor a lot, and you mentioned Charles, and then you talk about your kicking off point to this awareness of the importance of spirit was when you were at a concert. What was the name of the group? Jane's Addiction.
Jane's Addiction. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
and
true. It's all true. It's all true.
So we'll get to that. But I want to, before we get to all that, I want to start talking about Catholic education.
Yeah.
I had an interesting conversation last week with my former colleague, Rodney Hauser, and a former student, Jason Bach, who teaches high school religion, Rodney, of course, university. Right. And this afternoon, I'm going to be talking to Robert Mixa of Word on Fire.
Oh, great.
About the same topic of Catholic education. I want to talk about more than that with you, but since you are an educator and a Catholic and concerned with Catholic education, I thought that I would extend this sort of theme I've been on. And one of the things I want to explore with you is the question of how, obviously, in terms of Catholic identity, we're all aware that there's a crisis of Catholic identity, especially, say, in our Catholic high schools and so on. And a lot of that has to do with marketing pressures and the culture and all that. And a lot of people that are out there are saying, well, the answer is to double down on a really, really conservative sort of approach to things. Catechism thumping, Thomas Aquinas, girls can't show any knees.
Right.
This obsession with girls and their knees.
Always.
Yeah. And a sort of Catholic Amish sort of cultural ambiance.
Yep.
So I obviously am making fun of that and obviously don't approve.
You've left me no room with which to side with the Catholic Amish.
So given the parameters that I have now set for you and larded the conversation in my direction from the get-go, all joking aside, what is the answer then? And we've all been sort of red-pilled lately by goings on in the church, and we all want to retrench and become Peter Kwasniewski's and just retreat to the Latin Mass. That's got its charms. I like Peter. But is that really a recipe for reforming modern Catholic education?
Yeah, I mean, I would start off by saying that I am sympathetic to those that would look toward some kind of genuinely alternative sort of trajectories or alternative ways of forming communities. I'm very sympathetic to that, but I'm also wary of, if I'm just wary of that as a kind of a romanticism. I think it's a thing that we can all fall into. And I think that romanticism has its place. And I guess what I mean by romanticism is that it is looking to the past. I believe that nostalgia sort of can run in two different pathways. There's a productive nostalgia, and then there's a problematic nostalgia. And I sort of think about it this way. I think about, if the contours of your romantic imagination are fantasies or are they dreams? And I guess what I mean by that, dreams are viable potential realities that you can create in the world, and fantasies are unmoored from reality. So I sort of use that as a way of framing this sort of thing. And my concern with the sort of the more extreme versions of Catholic
traditionalism,
Amishism or something, is that it is too much of a fantasy. And I think that it tends to fetishize a style of the world, the style of living in the world that is not viable or real. It doesn't take into account the actual lived lives of people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in your Substack, I was reading in the comments section where you were replying to somebody, I don't know who, that you describe yourself as trad adjacent, which is kind of how in some ways I would describe myself. I would just describe myself straight up. I'm Resource Mont Communio, that channelized, but that's a form of traditionalism. So I am trad adjacent with regard to what that word trad now has come to mean, for better or for worse. Correct. So therefore, I'm like you. I have sympathies with that wing of things because I understand that against which they are retrenching and rebelling. But I, like you, I'm fearful that there's a false romanticization of the past going on, an idealization that does reside a bit in the realm of fantasy, and I think that one of the it's a coping mechanism,
right? I always call it a cope with a capital C. I always do.
Yeah, it's a coping mechanism rather than a really well thought out perspective.
Yeah.
And so as part of a coping mechanism, it comes as a package. Okay. And some of the packages are bigger than others, but the fact is that the package is in many cases very, very narrow. And anyway, it's very, very narrow.
Do you mean aesthetically or ideologically or philosophically?
I mean ideologically. One of my fears, for example, with regard to the more hardcore traditionalists and how they would run a school, with a strong Catholic identity, is that certain thinkers are just going to be ruled out.
Correct.
From the get-go. Certain forms of literature, certain types of music, certain kinds of philosophy, even certain kinds of theology. I mean, I could see a certain trad Catholic high school saying that no religion teacher could teach Ratzinger or Balthasar or de Lubac.
Yeah, which is and again, I think it deserves a stopping here just for a second and saying that's crazy. Okay, that needs to be said. That you cannot read two of the great theologians of the 20th century because they're bad people, and that's one word. That they're bad people. That is a recipe for ideological capture and disaster that scales down to the human level. I really believe that.
Yeah, I believe it too. And as sympathetic as I am to what it is they're rebelling against, the fact is that, I mean, as anybody that's been involved in social media lately knows, that when you're a trad adjacent person, you have a lot of trad friends on Facebook.
Of course.
And then the thousands of trad friends that your trad friends have, that leads to some so you end up with a rather interesting sampling of viewpoints from the trad world anytime you step into, say, like a Facebook conversation.
Sure.
And I was just having one the other day with a fellow who's clearly a trad who said, I've got no time for any of these modernist theologians like Ratzinger or Wojtyła or de Lubac. And I said, you don't understand what a modernist thinker was then if you think those guys were. But that's the problem. What this guy on Facebook, who's representative of so many, was saying was, Garrigou-Lagrange, Aquinas, that's it. That's all we need. All these other thinkers are the problem. So so I'd like to think that among traditionalists, this is a fringe point of view. I'm not certain that it is a fringe point of view. So to bring this back to the question of Catholic education, obviously in a Catholic high school, you're not going to be teaching straight up Balthasar or Ratzinger. They're not capable of filtering that, but you would filter it for them.
Sure.
All right. And give it to them in some form or another. Anyway, go ahead.
I want to comment on that because, I went through a fairly rapid process, in the last 2.5 years or so, 3 years or so, in which I sort of went through all of these things emotionally. And almost all of it was triggered by a combination of what I perceived then, and still pretty much now perceived then, as the sort of the general lack of discipline from the papacy. I'd say, and I mean that I'm not trying to shoot people. I perceived a general lack of discipline on the part of the Vatican, and then the McCarrick thing. This is a sort of a 1-2 punch that those of us who are, pro Vatican II, narrowly understood as, an ecumenical council.
With qualifications.
With qualifications, right. I think both of you and I are on the very same camp with that. But many people who are sort of full-throatedly pro-Vatican II in the online spaces and in Catholic media fail in this regard. And I think they fail to listen to people who have seen the mess in the last decade, and have then, in top of that, watched the big nothing burger happen with McCarrick. I mean,
Yeah.
well, when you and I were a kid, if I, broke the plate, I would get in trouble because I broke the plate. Right. I mean, it's not the end of the universe, but it would seem that the higher up you are in positions of power, you don't have to pay for broken plates.
Exactly. And I mean, this is a general rule of thumb across all human societies, probably for all times, that powerful and rich people, the elites of a culture, rarely are held to the same standards of justice and comeuppance as the plebeians are.
Right.
And the Catholic Church is just operating in this case like all other privileged institutions. The trouble is, you would expect the church to be better.
Well, I demand that it be better, because on her own terms, it says she is better. And this is really where I land right now, and part of my frustration, and we can get into that in a little bit. But trying to sort of anchor us back to sort of your opening question. I mean, I think it's important that, so I went through this whole trad process, right? So the mess of the last 6 or 7 years, is sort of dawning on me. The McCarrick thing happens, and it's like, holy smokes, something is really, really wrong here. And I have been a loyal and good soldier. I have, stood up for what I thought the church was asking of me as a Catholic layman and husband and father and all those sort of things. And this just seems like a mess. Maybe the mess is the 20th century. Maybe the mess is all of this stuff, right? And so you sort of like, maybe we do need to go back to basics. And it's, as you said, it's Aquinas and Garrigou-Lagrange, and like, maybe we just need to stop all of this funny business and get back to basics. And then, of course, you live with that for a little bit. You're like, well, that really can't be. And you recognize that in an attempt to make sense out of chaos, you try to radically shrink things down to that which is manageable. And so insofar as, I'm steel manning the sort of the trad position, I get it emotionally. And I do think it's an emotional thing, Larry. And I think it's important that we remember that.
It is.
That the way you deal with someone who's working through some sort of emotional mourning is not to be a jerk, I guess.
Yeah, and I agree. And to steel man it, the fact is, I have no problem whatsoever if a traditionalist opens a high school, let's say, and they don't want to deal with anything from Cardinal Newman forward. All right. That they want to instill in their students. They're going to read Plato and Aristotle, and they're going to read the ancient Greek playwrights, and then they're going to read the Roman playwrights and the Roman poets, and then they're going to read some of the church fathers and Augustine, then they're going to read Aquinas and maybe some Erasmus and some Bellarmine later on, and sort of get immersed, maybe even learn a little Latin and Greek along the way. So a whole classical education, which then forms a student in a certain sort of a social imaginary, as Charles Taylor says, and you thereby then, if your goal is to flip the script, this is what I often say to everyone that I talk to: you cannot let the culture dictate the terms of your child's education, the pedagogy of what a Catholic school is doing. But the culture is going to set the terms and the social imaginary, unless you do something very serious to flip that script, and that requires great teachers teaching great stuff. So you have to learn to walk before you run. So I'm not saying, well, let's just teach nothing but ressourcement theology, dumbed down for high school kids. And hey, if you want to teach Plato and Aristotle and Aquinas and Augustine, please do. I urge you to. But
and we do.
If you then use that as a cudgel against any of a more precocious student that might come forward and say, hey, my dad gave me this book by Ratzinger called Called to Communion that I think really is interesting. I think it brings some stuff up from what Augustine said here. Then that should be encouraged, not discouraged.
Yeah. I mean, look, the burden that we find ourselves, at this end point of history, all right, because, everybody alive is at the end point of history every day, right? But the burden, of course, is that we have, just from a church standpoint, we have 2,000 years of a patrimony in which the intellectual giants of our faith did not exactly sit on their hands. There's a lot
Right.
that we've been given, and that's a wonderful gift, and it truly is our patrimony. And so therefore we have more work to do than a kind of would-be secular school, which can sort of start, roughly with Bacon.
Yeah.
And sort of with all of the sort of the treating Bacon and Descartes as axioms from which to start, is just not a luxury that we have as Catholics. And thank God. I mean, I love all of that stuff that comes before the revolution, so to speak, intellectual and scientific revolution. Is great stuff. And I can tell you firsthand I have the privilege of walking my own students through some of this really old stuff. It's incredibly compelling, even for them. And so it's rather than looking at it as like, oh, it's this stuff that we have to kind of like bring along. It's like, no, man, they're great things there that speak to us still. And, I sense on some level that we in Catholic education have lost our nerve as regards this great patrimony that we have.
I agree. And I think that one of the things that high school kids are capable of are following, grasping, and understanding the significance of intellectual genealogies.
Absolutely. Love that. I use that phrase all the time. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. To connect the dots, that our culture, as it is given to us, didn't just drop from heaven as an angelic construction of Jefferson or whatever, and that there can be this is not the end of history. We are history has a point, but it isn't us.
Right.
And so maybe we would understand ourselves better if we understood how we got to where we are. And in so doing, we would see that those who came before us weren't as stupid as post-Enlightenment thinkers would have us believe. And therefore, what you're trying to do in a classical education is not just classics for the sake of classics, although there is a pedagogy that's great in just doing that. But you're trying to show them that almost everything we think about today was already thought about 1,500 years ago in a slightly different modality and cultural register. But we're still addressing the same questions, but we're answering them differently.
Well, I'll tell you a story. I mean, my whole so about a year after that incident that I told you about in February of 1991. That concert that I wrote about in my Substack, about a year later, not even a year later, actually, it's later that year, I'm in an honors seminar at LSU, and we are studying Homer, the Iliad. And despite all of my sort of iconoclastic tendencies in my late high school years, in which I had sort of fantastically and flamboyantly left the church and all that sort of stuff and tortured my poor parents, I always knew that like literature was important, that the great books were the great books and At any rate, and so we read the Iliad, and I had a great teacher, Bob McMahon. He was just amazing. And Homer really kind of came alive for us in that seminar. And at the end of it, he said, the Iliad is great. And we're all like, yeah, it's great, and he's like, and it's incredible to think that in all the years since, the Iliad was captured, we as human beings have never superseded it in its genius.
Wow.
Period, full stop. And I'm sitting there like, that's nuts. And he says, we've equaled it. And he Shakespeare, Dante, Dostoevsky, some others, but we've never surpassed it. And it was at that point, and this is true, I've told this story in another context, but it was at that point that I realized, man, I knew he was right. He was right. And that I had some serious work to do, because I loved being able to start history at about 1800.
It's easy.
It's easy. Yeah, it's easier. And I always always poke fun at my classic liberal friends. It's like they just believe that world history, intellectual history started 250 years ago. It's like, well, no, actually not at all. And so, and I saw the same thing in graduate school. I mean, so much of our educational establishment, I'm not talking Catholic terms here, I'm talking in secular terms, is basically, it's got about a 200, 300 year history. That's about it. And it's laughable.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. And I mean, a lot of it has to do with the Enlightenment's myth of origin.
Correct.
Which is a myth of original violence, in a sense.
Right.
Religions cause violence, so we've had to step in to quell that violence with the secular state.
Right.
But in so doing, a lot of modern philosophers, what they then engage in is what Augusto Del Noce calls the periodization of philosophical history, which
what does he
breaks
mean by
up.
that, Larry?
He means that you break down the history of philosophy in stages that parallel, by analogy, the stages of a human life.
Right.
So the realm of myth was the realm of intellectual and spiritual infancy. The realm of revealed religion was the time of a little older childhood and into adolescence. Then you get the Renaissance, which is full-blown adolescence. And then you don't reach intellectual adulthood until you reach atheistic, positivistic scientism and secularism and those things. And that represents the final stage of human thinking. Now, if you think that way, then that means that what the Enlightenment represents is the repudiation of everything that came before and the elevation of itself to pride of place as the end point of history.
Right. Right.
And therefore, it radically undermines all previous traditions. And it has to undermine all previous traditioning processes, the institutions that bear those traditions forward. This is Del Noce's point, which is why I think classical Catholic education that teaches kids proper intellectual genealogies and has them reading things like the Iliad, as you just pointed out, it bursts that mythology.
Yeah.
That periodization of things from that narrative of infancy to adulthood, and we are now in adulthood in our secularism. That narrative is so powerful and so strong in our culture. That's the narrative that we have to attack.
Yeah, it's the default settings of our culture, for sure.
Yeah.
And we kid ourselves if that is not the very thing which undermines any efforts that we might have on the family level to raise Catholic children, for instance. I mean, it's just, you kid yourself. If you think your kids haven't drunk deeply from that particular well, then you're a fool. I mean, that's what I did. That was the source of my own, departure. It's like, that was old stupid stuff. I'm young and smart. So.
Right. That's right. And which is why, like you said, you can turn off your TV and you can turn off maybe the internet, but you can't turn off your culture. You have to deal eventually with your culture in order to raise your children properly. And simply shielding them from the culture and giving them only stuff from the 13th century backwards isn't going to work, because they're going to encounter this stuff one way or the other eventually.
And you hear those stories, Larry. You hear these stories all the time, and more so with our fundamentalist Christian friends, of course, that all this stuff, which was called bad thought, bad stuff, or it just didn't even exist. All of a sudden, a kid kind of surreptitiously gets his hands on it, like it's some kind of samizdat, and it's like, well, of course, what do you think a kid's going to do? Oh, my, these sort of scary, dumb people don't want me to read this. Well, guess what I'm going to go do? And so it's just, that's why I'm really a fan and promote, as open of an intellectual inquiry as you can manage, appropriate to developmental stages.
Yeah, realizing that you're not dealing with sophisticated grad students or somebody engaged in postdoctoral research. You're dealing with adolescent minds that are contending with not just intellectual ideas, but the dawning of their sexual awareness and the whole electric charged sexual atmosphere of male-female relations, and now with the confusion of transgenderism and all that kind of stuff, their brains are just exploding. So you do have to be careful with what you do. You've got to have a certain sophistication, but nevertheless, my fear is this, in talking, for example, with many traditionalists, I have yet to find even one hardcore traditionalist that I know that thinks, for example, some version of biological evolutionary theory is true. They don't necessarily accept Genesis literally, but they also reject evolution. So my point would be this: okay, fine, you don't want to deal with that, but your child is going to have to deal with that.
It's a scandal.
Yeah. If your child wants to go to med school, if your child wants to go on for advanced degrees in the sciences and so forth, they're going to walk into us and they're going to run into people who are going to say to them, oh, you're a Bible thumper. And so what do you think of, I don't believe in evolution. It's, humans and dinosaurs coexisted and the earth is only 10,000 years old. And, you realize you're doing your child an enormous Darwinism has problems. Yep. Even Darwinists will say Darwinism has problems. There's no problem with questioning certain facets of the reductionistic theory that has come to be known as modern scientific evolutionism, which is a kind of ideology. But that's different from accepting the science of evolution as such. Right. And you have to, but that's just one example of what I'm talking about. Or when you take a politics course in college and your professor is putting forth a Marxist critique of capitalism, and you say, well, wait a minute, I was told that capitalism is like God's economic system.
That's right.
And
that's right.
These are all just bad ideas.
I mean, look, I don't think this will come as any surprise to you, but I am not a Marxist. I believe that Marx is the great sort of mind virus of the last 250 years, and it has an amazing ability to not be eradicated like a bad case of athlete's foot. But it is absolutely essential you have to wrestle with Marx.
Yeah, you got to deal with it.
And I would say you have to wrestle with Marx in high school. We do. We teach the Communist Manifesto as an opportunity to sort of talk about, the materialist dialectic and all that sort of stuff. It's so important because you have to, at the very least, you have to contend with the fact that Marxism has been incredibly compelling and has dominated intellectual currents since 1840, I think the manifesto is 51 or 48 or whatever. Anyway, the mid 19th century, like it has dominated the brains of very, very smart people for a very long time. And we kid ourselves if we don't equip our kids with a deep immersion in what all that means. You don't have to accept it. Obviously, I'm not a Marxist.
They could go to school, college, and suddenly be exposed to critical race theory.
Well, they will be, right? I mean, so
they will be exposed to
kind of normie track. I talked earlier about the default settings of the culture. The operating system of almost every aspect of the university is some kind of neo-Marxism. It just is.
Yeah, and so they've got to be equipped to deal with that intellectually. So have them read a little Marx and then critique it. Yeah. And talk to them about critical race theory and what actually it's got going for it. I mean, there are some aspects of critical race theory that are in fact quite true. There's racism in our culture and we have failed to deal with it. And it's kind of systemic in many ways. So why is that? But then you can expose maybe some of its Marxist, neo-Marxist roots and where that sends it off the rails. And it gives you a capacity for critique that you wouldn't normally have. So that's my fear about a tradism sort of school that would be sort of Aquinas turtles all the way down in a sort of coping mechanism with modernity that doesn't really then deal with the full intellectual genealogy of modernity and why we're here and how to deal with it. And your better students can get that stuff. It's precisely your better students who need to get that stuff.
Right. And I would say that, not only is it absolutely, that's absolutely true. The better students need it. But I would say that all of my students have benefited by reading the Communist Manifesto in class with me. It's not just for the super brights who are going to be in, work in intellectual circles or, that sort of thing. It's really important. And I think we underestimate how much they actually can get. It's been my experience that I've thrown a lot at my students, and I'm always amazed. And of course, I expect my super bright kids to get it all, and they do. But I've been amazed. What I've been amazed at most is my middle quotient and my lower register. They really do get it. They get something out of it, and it's a very important for us.
Well, that brings me to a related topic, and then I want to move on. But it's something that I never hear people talk about when they talk. You know, and I've been largely guilty of this as well. When you talk about reforming Catholic education, what kids need, we stay on this intellectual register. Here's what they need to read. Here's how we need to engage them intellectually. Here's the philosophical genealogy, blah, 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 blah. But what you just said about them having the capacity for much more, I think is so true, and we underestimate it. But one of the things we underestimate and we don't pay enough attention to, and some people now are starting to, is the spirituality of children, the psychological spirituality of children going back as early as 5, 6, 7 years old.
Yeah.
And realizing that little kids even have spiritual ideas and think spiritual thoughts.
Absolutely. Oh, and absolutely. I mean, yes.
And that this only increases in Go ahead.
Do you think do we ignore it? Is it your suggestion?
I think that we ignore it in some profoundly silly ways, where we just sort of assume, especially in the early years, that we need to sacramentalize our children, get them ready for First Communion, get them ready for confirmation. And I'm not knocking teaching them doctrine and catechism. You have to do that's a baseline. You have to do that. But then to realize that in all of the sort of emotional and psychological challenges that young children face in today's culture, as well as oftentimes with their fractured family lives, that they often have deep spiritual wounds and hurts, and also then deep spiritual questions that remain unaddressed. And they might seek answers, you know, outside of Christianity, outside of Catholicism, if their church, their pastor, their parents, their religion teachers are not providing them with in other words, a child may not know what it is they know, and they may not know, therefore, what questions to ask themselves. They're not self-critical or self-aware yet. So I'm wondering if not, you know, it would be interesting, I think, to introduce into a Catholic high school curriculum, in a sense, the psychology of the spiritual life, the stages of spiritual growth and development that the mystics have written about, and what it is that we experience when we're experiencing God. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah, I do. And you know, I think the struggle is going to be, you know, time and space. You know, it's a school, right? And so, you know, schools have credits and you have classes that you take and you know, all that. And so how do you make it part of the whole effort? I mean, you know, maybe that's maybe the limitations are twofold, right? Because remember, you know, most Americans, in my experience, have a kind of instrumental appreciation of what education is for, right? And so, you know, you go to school, so you take your science credits, your math credits, and your Spanish credits, and your English credits, and all of that, you know, so that you can amass a certain amount of credits so that you can graduate on time, so that you can go to college. And, you know, you're putting together a resume so that, you know, you're attractive to some college and you get to go and all that. And I think a lot of people just sort of see it as a series of hoops that you jump through, and at the end, you got the paper, and then you move on, right? It's very instrumental.
Well, you know, I guess in some sense, what I'm saying is, you know, in this day and age of assessment mania, all right, where you're being told, for example, that in at least this is the way it was when I was at DeSales towards the tail end of my career, in every single class that you teach, there has to be a public speaking component in your curriculum. There has to be a certain oral communication skills component in your curriculum. Well, personally, I'd rather gouge out my eyes with knitting needles than sit through a student presentation. Seriously. And I would say that I would write in my syllabus, for example, we will have student presentations. And then I would stand up to the class and say, we are not having student presentations. I just put this in the syllabus to make middle states happy. But I would rather gouge out my eyes with knitting needles than sit and listen to. And you know what? 5% of the students are insulted by that, and 95% are greatly relieved.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, you know, they don't want to do the damn presentation. But my point is this. Not that I think that maybe there should be a separate course called the psychology of the spiritual life, but that and presenting the the intellectual genealogy of theological ideas and cultural ideas, and as it's embedded in literature and history and philosophy and theology, that we also speak to the mystical and spiritual and supernatural elements in all of that. And I know in your that's so. What I want to get to now is your Substack, and then I want to get to Rod Dreher. What time is it? Okay,
yeah.
In the sense that I want to introduce students who have a capacity for this,
right,
to the importance of spirit,
right.
That we're not just learning subjects.
This has been my obsession
to it.
Yeah, this has been my obsession the last 6 months.
So let's introduce readers to your Substack now. I loved your little piece about spirit and animation and moving. And this is kind of what I think we need to communicate to our students in some ways.
Well, let me ask you, gosh, so I wrestled this thing. It came to me that I had to write about this. And so I started writing about it. And look, I mean, the beauty of a Substack is that it's just sort of me just throwing it out there and seeing if anything compelled. But what as a reader, I mean, I can tell you on the inside what I'm trying to work on. But like, what did you take away from the piece? First of all, I guess is my first question to you. I mean, so you see me, I'm struggling with spirit. Full disclosure, I believe in spirits. Okay, so
I took away from the piece was you didn't say anything that was earth-shatteringly new.
Right.
Spirit is real.
Right.
But you're a very good writer, by the way, which would befit a literature guy. Very good writer, and you get right to the point. But what you do so well in there is to expose, at least you did for this reader, the extent to which my own internal default position is the modern secular one. So for the viewers listening here, you reference a lot the writings of a guy named Charles Taylor. And right. So for those who don't know, it's books back here on this little tiny temporary shelf of mine, A Secular Age by Charles Taylor. It's a massive tome, but it's been very, very influential in contemporary philosophical and religious thinking. There it is, Charles Taylor, A Secular Age. Okay, there's a lifetime well spent reading that.
Yeah.
But in that text, he talks about a lot of things. But what he talks about is a thing called the social imaginary, which is just a fancy way of saying the manner in which our culture utterly surrounds us and frames the way we view reality.
Right.
The symbol system that it gives us for interpreting reality. And whether we like to admit it or not, we can transcend that social imaginary to a certain extent. We can try to reverse it, working, but we cannot completely escape it.
Right.
Because even in our attempts to escape it, we're going to be, in some sense, our reaction against it will be formed by the very social imaginary that we are in.
Right.
And that's our social imaginary as a society is what Taylor calls the immanent frame. Right. IMMANENT. Right. Not imminent as something is just about to happen, but immanent as within.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we live completely horizontally,
right,
as a people and a culture. The only thing that matters are efficient material causes,
right,
force, action, science. Okay. And even if we're religious believers that believe in spirit and God and Jeebus and supernatural things, we don't really. I blogged about this endlessly, which is why your Substack hit home to me.
Yeah.
The de facto atheism of the church, the beige Catholicism of our era, the boredom, all of it has its roots in this rancid horizontalism. Right. And yet that horizontalism, despite its best efforts, cannot answer the perennial urgings, movings, questions of the spirit. And I thought that's what your Substack essay, which wasn't really long, maybe a couple thousand words, maybe 2 or 3 thousand.
Yeah.
That it really drove home to me that, it is my default position.
Right.
And I don't think enough about how my own thoughts and what it is that I will might actually not only be influenced by my spirit,
right, my
soul,
right,
but by spirits outside of me.
Right.
God, angels, demons.
Yeah, no, and that's right. That's right. And what I find interesting about those of us, all of us who live in this social imaginary with the immanent frame bias, this sort of flattened horizontal world that, yet you and I are communicants in a religion which denies that
Yeah.
entirely. Right. In other words, every Sunday I go to an event we call the Mass, in which we witness the priest offering the holy sacrifice of the Mass, in which we witness transubstantiation. And so when I walk up to humbly, as much as I can muster, to receive communion, I'm breaking the immanent frame. I'm smashing it every time. And and so therefore, the image that I'm using in the Substack, or the other frame that Taylor talks about, is that the idea of the porous self and the buffered self. And so that if you are in the social imaginary of the immanent frame, you believe that you are a complete and entire unto yourself. And you can imagine a kind of like a glass case that separates, an impermeable glass, that keeps everything out, right? It's sort of a prophylactive of sorts, right? It keeps everything out and keeps anything from coming in. Whereas this prior conception, which would have been true for the entire history of humanity up until around 1550s or thereabouts, we believe that we are not porous selves, that there is no real protective membrane around this thinking self, that things move in and through us all the time. And I am just simply sort of trying to point out that we still actually kind of know that, even though we live in the immanent frame. And the way that we know that is that our language still holds on to all this verbiage, which suggests that, I heard Larry give a talk and I found it compelling. Okay, what do I mean by that? It compelled me. Right. It something that he said moved something in me. And so Larry is moving me, compelling me. And so our language holds on to this, even though intellectually we sort of say, well, that's just not a real thing. I'm a rock, I am unto myself, and I think that we need to be more open to the idea that things outside of us have power over us.
Oh, I think that is so true. And I think even Charles Taylor would say, of course, there's no such thing as an absolute buffered self versus an absolute. None of us are absolutely buffered or porous.
Right.
And our language does seem to indicate we still believe in a porous self. But then I would move on to another book by another guy that's also huge and thick. It's also back here on my shelf. It's by Eugene McCarraher, who teaches at Villanova. It's called The Enchantments of Mammon. And McCarraher takes some small issue with the Weberian thesis of disenchantment, that we live in a disenchanted world. Now, Taylor doesn't completely agree with the idea of a completely disenchanted world. Different kinds of it. So McCarraher believes that essentially economics, capitalism, money, hence mammon, is the true enchantment of our age. So McCarraher prefers to speak, in other words, we're still porous selves. This is my point. We're not completely buffered selves. We're still porous selves. And McCarraher would say our porosity is now open to a variety of different enchantments, misenchantments.
Right.
And so it's extremely important that we understand, to go back to Catholic education again, what kinds of enchantments are out there that we are allowing in to affect our spirit.
That's right. That's great. That's fantastic. I'm not familiar with that. I'll have to do a deep dive into that, because it has been my sense that when I start talking about spirits and looking out for the language of spirits, we as a culture, maybe Americans, tend to think of spirits as good things, right? Like, whoa, the spirit of 76, as I point out, the spirit of this and da. But we rarely talk about the bad side, right? And I'm old school enough to understand that, if there are good spirits, then there are bad spirits. And so when am I being, I don't want to use the word possessed, because I know what that conjures. I can't even use the word conjure because I know what that word implies. So you see, like, our language, it's almost impossible to talk about this without positing spirits. You know,
Yeah.
where does this stuff come from?
Yeah. Yeah. And how does it affect us? How does it influence us? And this is my point in bringing up McCarraher. His point would be, we do live in a horizontalist immanent frame.
Yeah.
But his point would be that horizontalist immanent frame is not simply completely nihilistic. It comes with its own set of enchantments.
Right.
And those enchantments are the idolatrous replacements for the more porous self-vertical enchantments of pre-modern times. So his point would be was we need to recover. In other words, he's calling into question a little bit this distinction between porous and buffered selves and saying we're still pretty porous. We're just not porous to the right things anymore.
Yeah, which I would absolutely agree with. Yes, absolutely. That's what I'm getting at, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean Taylor's not wrong that we have what we're buffered against is precisely, I would say, God and spirit and those sorts of that's what we're buffered against. Yes. But we're porous.
You might even say inoculated against.
Yeah, exactly, and that's Del Noce's point.
Yeah,
but we are porous to a whole set of really bad enchantments.
Yeah,
that we need,
but we don't acknowledge them as such.
No, we don't. And see, this is why I'm always blogging about bourgeois mediocrity, writing a book for Ignatius Press right now on bourgeois mediocrity. I'm a one-trick pony, but man, this is it, okay? Because the problem with the church today, listen to me, listen to this old fart, listen to this old cudgel, this curmudgeon, using his cudgel of bourgeois modernity. But the fact is, until we identify the rot, until we identify the disease, the bacillus that infects us, then we're not going to get very far. You can do a synod on synods and have a big meeting on meetings and talk about synodality and rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, to use a cliche.
Right.
But as Ratzinger noted all the way back in the 70s, when the Germans were already engaging in a synod, post-Vatican II synod, and people forget about this. Yeah. I mean, the Germans were already doing this. And young Joseph Ratzinger in the 70s was saying, as soon as the church starts navel gazing and talking structurally about its own structures, then the jig is up, that this is just nonsense and it's going to be boring. And this is my point about bourgeois. The church needs to stop looking at its own internal structures. Are we too papal, or we need to be more? Yeah. It needs to focus on the disease, which is this horizontalist immanent frame with all the idolatries that come with it, that are pouring into our porous selves, framing our worldview, and it's bourgeois. It's materialist. Yeah. Anyway, you get my point. I'm ranting and raving.
No, and obviously, in this, you and I are of one accord. That it just feels like, it reminds me of when an NGO or a nonprofit achieves its goal, and then it's sort of like, well, got all this money, got all this mechanism, I got all this structure. What are we going to do next? And now it's a limited analogy because, the church's work is never done. The work of saving souls is never done. But you do get the sneaking suspicion that it's a church that doesn't have a deep attachment to its founding principle or something.
Well, you don't want to be too harsh and all that sort of stuff. I realize. But okay, so this is one of the things that, in the questions I sent you before this, right? I did want to talk about Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, but we can segue into that eventually, maybe, or do it in another show, because I want to talk about synodality and this whole thing. I want to draw viewers' attention to the latest issue of Communio, International Catholic Review. It is devoted to this question of synodality, and shocking for a pontifical institution. It's the Pontifical John Paul II Institute in Washington, D.C., that a lot of the professors that are there are writing in the current issue of Communio.
Right.
Guys like Nick Healy and Mike Hanby, they have some really, really probing, hard-hitting criticisms of the synodal way and the synod and the concept of synodality as it's being presented to us, especially by people like Fagioli Massimo Fajole, Maximum Beans, as Peter
Massimo,
was.
yes, good old Massimo.
Maximo Fajole, Maximum Beans, as his trad critics call him, which I think is kind of funny. So the point being that, and I share the deep suspicion that this is in some ways simply going to be the elevation of bureaucracy and the rule by a kind of elite class. In other words, look how the synodal process is going forward, Kale, and then you can comment on this. What is being done? What is being done? Questionnaires have been sent out, right? Questionnaires that bishops then give to their priests, which are then given to, there's meetings of parishioners in the parish hall, and they're asked to fill out these questionnaires. Like, we're in a small group meeting. What do you think the Holy Spirit's telling you right now about what the church needs? These, the most banal, anodyne, and leading kind of questions drawn right from some sort of psychobabble book from the 70s. Okay, it's very therapeutic and so on, and all under the pretext of democracy, under the pretext of a listening church, when in many ways it's larded with a certain ideological thing. Then there's the problem of this. Number one is that if you want to do a proper survey, then get sociologists who are experts in polling to get a real sense. Otherwise, you're going to be a self-selected group of Catholic activists. 99% of Catholics out there don't give a rat's petard about the synodal process or the damn questions that are being asked. And if they're asked to come to a parish hall meeting to discuss meetings, a meeting on meetings, okay, they're not going to go. They're going to watch Price is Right or some other thing on TV.
So bad.
They're not going to go to the parish hall, when there's a movie on Netflix, so they can fill out a questionnaire and discuss it. No, the only people that are going to go there are the self-motivated Catholic activists of both the right and the left. All right. And this is going to be, so in other words, my problem with the whole process is this. It seems to me to be rigged. It is simply an attempt to bring secular modernity into the church through the ruse of a democratized church in through the back door. They're going to bring in through the back door what they can't simply bring in through the front door through papal fiat. A pope that has issued more motu proprios than any other pope of the past 50 years combined is not a pope who believes in synodality. This is a pope who rules by fiat, by personal fiat, for better or for worse. And I'm not anti Pope Francis. He's not a heretic. I just think he's a lousy pope. Okay. And I think this is, all the while he's talking synodality, he's issuing motu proprio after motu proprio after motu proprio, where I say this, boom, it's done. Okay. So how does a pope who rules by personal legislative fiat suddenly then start talking about, we need less papal centralism and we need to farm this out to the synodal way? And then the questionnaires go out and a self-selected group of Catholic activists come back. It's, we want contraception and women priests. Oh, well, we need to then maybe talk about that. What about gay marriage? The Germans are doing anyway. What do you think of all?
So yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a theologian, and I'm a man trying to live as a Catholic in the contemporary world and raise a family and be married and all of that. And I watch this stuff, and I can't shut my mind off. I can't shut my brain off, and it just looks like a front. It looks like a farce to me. Like, I have no problem with conversation. I have no problem with dialogue. But I mean, how many times is conversation and dialogue just a front to backdoor things that you have always had as your pet issues? I mean, so it really just kind of stinks to me that way. It just seems.
And by the way, none of this is to imply that the church shouldn't be more synodal and less centered in the papacy.
Well, and that's where I sort of get caught in this sort of weird bind, because, like, in theory, yes, right. In fact, I think the centralization of the papacy that has happened in the last 200 years is a huge problem, and one that actually keeps me up at night. Hi, Larry. I guess we're still recording. We shall see. It'll pop back on.
Okay, we're back.
No problem.
It looks like we're still recording. Like I said, I was afraid this was going to happen, and it has. But we're back.
Hey,
we're back.
It's all very
So the
real
point is,
here. It's all very here with Larry.
but
So
now you're on the top of my screen, and I'm on the bottom. So go ahead, Kale.
So it feels like a front. And I'll tell you this, as someone, I'm a teacher, and I've been through reaccreditation processes on a couple of occasions, and it just smacks of a reaccreditation process. In other words,
doesn't it?
It really does, right? And
complete with a self-study.
Oh, exactly. It's exactly right. And like, so what did we learn from the self-study? You mean the things that I already kind of thought and wanted to sort of backdoor anyway? Yeah. So of course it's not real, right? It's a process fetishization. And
it fails to realize that some of the greatest and most horrific autocratic moves in the history of everything happened under the guise of democratic processes.
Right.
Hitler was elected to every position he ever held.
That's exactly right.
So, or appointed into a position by somebody who was elected by the people to do those sorts of things. So. And I don't mean to draw out the Hitler card. This has nothing to do with Hitler. My only point is that democracy is seemingly being presented by the promoters like Fajoli of this synodal process as this unquestioned dynamic: egalitarianism, democracy, an American way of thinking, or a Western secular Euro way of thinking. This is the boilerplate that seems to be. The default position of this whole process, and that's not true synodality. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and every time I read something of his, and see his tweets, it's like this sort of, he really just kind of like hates America or something. It's kind of weird. I'm not one of these people who is incapable of looking at my own country and recognizing problems and biases and all those sorts of things, but it's just sort of this weird, every time somebody says something that he doesn't like about the church, he just smears it as sort of like, well, this is what happens when you've got the alt-right Catholic American who It's like, you're not taking this seriously. He doesn't dislike America. He dislikes conservative America. Right. He likes the people, at all the very important Catholic high institutions of higher learning, because they're all rowing in the same direction.
Wasn't he a featured speaker at that sort of meeting up in Chicago, led by Supich, the original clerical dung beetle of dung beetles?
And that's an interesting. So I think that when the histories of all of this era are written, like I think there will be something about that particular meeting, and I don't know that much about it, but it just smacks of.
Well, here's
gross. It's just gross.
Here's the chutzpah of it all, and then I'll get back to synodality and why I actually support synodality and a decentralization of papal authority, but that this actually undermines it, because what's really being elevated here, as we see in these questionnaires and so forth, is process over substance. And eventually what it's going to elevate is a certain sociologism over...
What do you mean by
that? I mean bureaucratization via the social sciences.
Right.
So sociology and psychology come to dominate the ecclesial bureaucratic apparatus.
Right.
And thus you're going to have rule by a series of elites, which is a kind of clericalism in a sort.
Yes.
So I view the current synodal process as actually an extension of clericalism rather than its remedy, because you're going to replace one set of elites with another set of elites who are still going to be working at the behest of the clerical elites. All right. In the name of some unnamed laity and people of God. That have been conjured up as the people. Now, so the Chicago thing is part of this. And what strikes me is the chutzpah, the sheer hypocritical chutzpah of these modern liberal Catholics who have suddenly become ultramontanists, who now this whole meeting in Chicago was about what can we do about the fact that poor Pope Francis is being attacked by these conservative. What? How dare they attack the Pope? When in fact liberal every in the United States, their calling card was a National Catholic Reporter, which week ran columns by Hans Kung and Richard McBrien that blasted John Paul, blasted Paul VI, blasted Humanae Vitae, blasted the non-ordination of women. We need contraception. We need women priests. We need married priests. We need gay marriage. And this was on their pages in every one of their publications for decades and decades. They showed not a shred or a scintilla of respect, let alone humanity, towards the greatness of a Wojtyła or a Ratzinger as Pope, and did everything in their power to undermine the authority of both of those popes. Now, all of a sudden, they've discovered a pope that they like, and they've all become, oh, it's so awful. You know, it's like, you just want to reach across the table and punch them in the nose. No, I'm not advocating violence.
No,
YouTube.
but you're right.
Don't censor me, YouTube. I'm not.
But Larry,
it's a metaphor.
Right. It's gross, right? I mean, it's gross, and it's hypocritical, and it's cynical. Like, it's so cynical, and I just it really bothers me. And then they'll like throw lumen gentium 25 at me, and I'm like, you of all people, you're gonna throw that at me? Like, are you kidding me? Yeah, you know. So I don't have anything to add. I think you're right. I agree with you. I think it's you know. So then, what are they trying to do, Larry? What are they trying to do? It's
an attempt to horizontalize the church. Right. It's an attempt to align the church with the social imaginary of modern Western liberalism. Once again, what they have failed to do is to properly identify the bacillus that infects us.
Right.
And the bacillus that infects us is the bourgeois iteration of modern political liberalism, with its nullification of God. Not atheism as such, but something far more insidious. The treating of God as a complete irrelevancy, a silliness, a kind of almost neurosis that we just need to get beyond.
Well, he's like the mad king on the second floor that nobody ever gets to see or talk to, right? The bureaucrats run the things, and he's just over there.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't want to talk about any of that other than to embrace it, to say, yeah. So, in other words, to oppose modern political liberalism in any way, and I've seen this all over social media by liberals, is equated then with a strong integralism and illiberalism. As if modern political liberalism is the only way to be, in a sense, liberal, in the sense of believing in human rights, believing in the rights of conscience, believing in religious freedom, believing in certain free market aspects and stuff, that one has to embrace the full-orbed ideology of modernity in order to avoid the charge of being illiberal. I don't think that's true. And so we need clerics, we need religious leaders like John Paul and Benedict who kind of got that, okay?
Well, Go ahead. So this leads me to something else you said you wanted to talk about, which was this new reform of the Curia. That I think is probably worth bringing up right here.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I got to ask why, other than an attempt to water down distinctions between, what does an ordained person mean? What does it mean to be an ordained priest versus not? Like, is it a real thing or not? Or is it just merely convention? It sounds to me like the reform of the Curia, while not explicitly saying that, of course, right, but is implying that, I should be able to run a congregation. Oh, wait, I can't run a congregation, so we'll just call everything a dicastery. Because I can run a dicastery because I'm an unordained man, or my wife is an unordained woman, so she can run a dicastery. So just call everything a dicastery. We get rid of congregations, and voila. It strikes me as like, why? Why now? Like, what are we doing?
Hey, look, I have no problem with competent, devout Catholic lay people working within congregations and dicasteries, but running them. That's a different story, because then I think you are, like you said, you're blurring the distinction between the clerical, the priestly, sacramental order, and the priesthood of the baptized in general. I think you're blurring that distinction. I think it's important to continue for the Catholic Church to continue to affirm its hierarchical structure and status. No matter how, in other words, I'm big, as you know, on the universal call to holiness. I'm re-empowering the laity.
Both of us are.
But this does not mean clericalizing the laity.
Right.
And I'm for that. That's the old problem. The old problem was the only people who really have power are the clerics. So in order to empower lay people, they need to share in the power of the clerics. Wrong.
Wrong.
Let the clerics have their power, and we lay people need to claim our specific kind of power. The problem is lay people were infantilized in the past.
Right.
And they need to be now adult Christians and go out into the world and leaven the world and all that. To run a congregation or to preach at Mass, all of this is to clericalize the laity, I think, in really bad ways. And once again, it's just an attempt, I think, at a faux democracy.
Well,
I also think that the leaving of, well, go ahead. You were going to say something. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You said the leaving of what?
The reduction of things from dicastery, from congregation to dicasteries, I think was also a way of leveling the playing field of all the various curial offices, so that the CDF was, in a sense, demoted in importance.
So what are the implications of that?
I think the implications is once again orthopraxis over orthodoxy.
Right.
That because the sort of dicastery now, the ultimate dicastery, the one from which all the others flow, is the one on evangelization, which is fine. I'm all about evangelization. I'm all over evangelization. Let's go for it. Let's do it if it's properly construed. But evangelization is something quite active, isn't it? It relates more to it relates a lot to orthopraxis. Orthodoxy is, of course, also involved in evangelization, but it's got a lot to do with orthopraxis. And what I see is a positioning of Christian action above Christian thought.
Right.
And almost putting them in opposition to one another. So the demotion of the CDF, I think, to just sort of one player among many is a way of saying, oh, these old doctrinal disputes we used to get all upset about. Why can't we just all get along? Why can't we just all love our neighbors as ourselves?
Right.
And, and quite frankly, Pope Francis has made some comments over the years that does pit truth against mercy, doctrine against praxis.
Well, and that's part of the undiscipline, the lack of discipline that I struggle with. That's
it's sloppy.
I made earlier. Right. It's sloppy.
It's just intellectually sloppy. And so I see a lot of this curial reform as more sloppiness. The mere fact, too, Pope Francis was supposedly elected to reform the Curia. So now this is a document 9 years in the making. And when they promulgated it, it had mistakes in it. Like it continued to talk about the extraordinary form of the liturgy, which when people pointed that out, they had to rush in and airbrush that out. We can't be talking about the EF. Well, you mean to tell me you've had 9 years to think about this and you made that? Furthermore, the document was not issued as in a Latin edition with a bunch of really nice vernacular French, English, German, Chinese, whatever, ready-made and ready to go out, Spanish. No. It was in Italian, and then people were rushing around trying to get proper vernacular translations. Once again, you had 9 years to do this. This is your chief charge. What's wrong? Talk about sloppiness.
Yeah, so I find the irony of this just so rich historically, right? Because if you look back the history, the genealogy of the calling of the Second Vatican Council, so much of that was the attempt to wrench out of the hands of the Italian crew the mafia, that ran the Vatican. So much of that was like an attempt to sort of wrest control out of the Holy Office and truly, internationalize the Roman Catholic Church, the Catholic part of Roman Catholic. And yet here we are, in 2022, and it's like seems to be as Italian as it's ever been. Right. I mean, anyway, I note that as a little bit of an irony, but I would suggest to you that even though I have not been shy, nor have I shut up about problems that I've had with our ordained betters over the years, I understand as a Catholic that it is absolutely crucial in the sacramental economy that I recognize that holy orders are real. Capital R, real.
Yes.
Okay. That I am not an ordained person, and therefore I can never pretend that I am. Okay. So the implications of the reality of me as an ordained person or as not an ordained person, has implications for sex. It has implications for the very sacrament that I orient my entire life around, which is the Eucharist, right? In other words, it's not an accident that Jesus was a man. It's not an accident that Jesus, that the priest who confects the sacrament at the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass is a man. And so I just sense there's a sort of a larger movement afoot to pretend that sex is not real, that sacraments are not real, that they are, I don't know, super symbols, I guess people might, I don't know. But to me, I just see that as an attempt to hack at the foundations of a sort of a fully sacramental worldview. And I know that sounds like a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but I see it all connected.
Yeah, I think it's an attempt once again to a lot of this. God, there's so many issues we could talk about. A lot of it too has to simply do with how do we appropriate and therefore understand the reforms of the Second Vatican Council.
Yeah, we're back.
Okay, and so one of the great debates, of course, then is the great tug of war between communio and concilium elements. So, do we talk of the Church as a communion, a communio, of hierarchically nested in a nested hierarchy?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, but with the uppermost part of the hierarchy being the Trinitarian communion that is God, whose inner Trinitarian communion life gets communicated to the Church via Christ, who is its sacramental core, engendering then a communio of saints here in heaven and on earth, sacramentally via Christ. That's one that's called the communion ecclesiology, of which I am a fan and a devotee. The other ecclesiology is the one that talks about the Church as a sojourning people of God.
Okay.
And this becomes, I mean, if you lived as I did through the 70s especially, it was people of God, people of God, people of God, people of God.
Yeah, all my teachers were people of God teachers. So.
Yeah, and why? Why? Because the phrase people of God, used by the Second Vatican Council, yes, was ripped out of its conciliar context. We are a people of God, according to the Council, precisely because we are first and foremost part of the communion of saints rooted in Christ and in the Trinitarian life of God. The people of God concept, as a metaphor for the Church, as a people sojourning through time, is rooted in a prior communio ecclesiology. But people of God gets ripped out of context. Why? Because it easily lends itself to the media fabrication of a church that's now gone democratic and egalitarian.
Right.
No longer do we have a hierarchy, a priest. We're all just this amorphous, homogenized blob of baptized folks that we now call the people of God. We're holding hands in an ecclesiastical game of Red Rover, send somebody over, and walking forward into our future, the brave future of the people of God. And I see in this papacy, and not that Pope Francis buys, I'm not trying to say Francis is a kumbaya tambourine, felt banner Catholic kind of guy. I don't think he is, actually. I think he doesn't like that kind of crap. But nevertheless, he is trying to retrieve, because he is a devotee of the Bologna school of hermeneutics, which is that Vatican II, what it taught, is not as important as what it was.
Right.
The Bologna school says the council was an event more than a teaching, an event that set up a dynamic. So we're perfectly justified in teasing out of those conciliar documents words and phrases that we think speak to that dynamic. And that's what Francis is retrieving here, I think, is that Bologna school focus on the people of God metaphor.
Yeah, if I could offer you any advice unsolicited here, is that you can't beat this drum loud enough, Larry. You, someone who has the chops and who knows this. But, I just stumbled into the whole Bologna school thing a couple of years ago. I'd never heard of that really before. I mean, I knew it because that was sort of the spirit that I had been taught in as a kid and as a young adult, but that is such a huge distinction. So like when I see people that I like Bishop Barron and some of these other folks online, and they're talking about how great Vatican II is and all this sort of stuff, what they fail, in my estimation, to do is that he's sort of doing work for the Bologna school without knowing that he's doing work for the Bologna school by not sort of saying, hey, this is what we mean by it. So like every conservative, theologian, is going to say, yeah, Vatican II is great. And like, the documents are fantastic. And I can see every like Bologna school person being like, excellent, keep talking about the documents of Vatican II, because I'm just going to smuggle the Spirit right through that.
Yeah, I obviously, I'm going to be interviewing Bishop Barron on May 6th on here. And all my viewers, blog readers know, I absolutely love Bishop Robert Barron. I've known him for years. I think he does great work. And when he speaks on Vatican II, I think he does great work.
Same.
But here's the deal. The sort of charism of Word on Fire and what Barron is trying to do is it's in some sense I like it, in some sense I don't. It's an attempt to stay above the fray of all of these disputes. In other words, the reason why I was invited to come on Bishop Barron's show out in California and interview is because he was reading my blog and he actually likes what I was saying. So in other words, I think Robert Barron, the theologian, would agree with 99% of what we're saying. But what he's doing in his ministry, I think, is as an evangelist, is trying to stay above the fray. And but that frustrates guys like you and me, because we want to get down in the trenches, because we want to. So that's why one of my more important blogs, I think, was the series of blogs I did on pointing out that Vatican II really did change things and reverse certain teachings. It really did point out that there were some church teachings in the past, guess what, that were wrong. Like, it's not okay to burn heretics at the stake. And we must grant religious freedom to people, and so on. That these, in denying those things, we kind of, now Vatican II doesn't say that explicitly, but Father Guarino in his book, The Disputed Teachings of Vatican II, points this out clearly. I mean, there were reversals here. So the point then is, what happens in a lot of conservative Catholics who want to emphasize constantly continuity. It's an Irenicism. It's a sort of, we just flow from one era of the church to another rather seamlessly. This is false. And we need to, in order to deal with the challenge of the Bologna school and those who advocate that the council was an event that actually was a rupture with the past, a kind of second Reformation that now is setting the church on an entirely different path. You're not going to combat that narrative by denying that the council actually did change certain teachings. You have to look at why it changed those teachings.
So let me jump in here, right? And this picks up this whole question of the synodal process, right? So this is why, if this, what you're talking about right now, the reason why this matters so much is that those that would tout the glories of the synodal synods, or synodal process, or the synodal way, they're going to jump on this and they're going to say, listen to the Holy Spirit, listen to the Holy Spirit. It's always curious to me that when one listens to the Holy Spirit, it always takes on the register of sort of liberal modernity. Every time. I mean, apparently I can't listen to the Holy Spirit and say, go to confession, or like, let's read, it always goes one way. And that's the power of this sort of spirit of Bologna that is so corrosive. It's so corrosive, and nobody talks about it really.
Yeah. St. Paul talked about, the discernment of spirits. Test everything. Discern the spirits. Because things were in many ways even more chaotic in his time, because more unformed. In other words, there was no creed yet, no Vatican, no magisterium. There was just a bunch of apostles running around the empire, and there were probably a lot of imposter apostles running around, as we kind of glean from various New Testament writings.
We know,
we know. And so here's Paul saying, essentially, you need to discern the spirits, and the bellwether, the bell cow, the metric is going to be listening to the apostles, listening to the magisterium of the church, in so many words.
So because we have to recognize there's some special connection the apostles have with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I mean, because, notice what Paul didn't say, like when he was writing to the Corinthians, who are obviously all smitten with a certain New Age, Gnostic kind of Illuminati. We're the illuminated ones, we're the elites, and so on. He says basically, you guys are buying into a lot of crap. You guys have bought into a load of BS, and you need to fix your eyes on Christ and apostolic teaching and so on. He didn't say, You know what? I'm going to send Barnabas with a questionnaire,
Right, right,
and you
right,
need to
right.
break into little synodal groups, and then I'm going to be a listening church. I'm going to listen to what you Corinthians have to say, and then I'm going to take that to the other apostles, and we're going to say this is the voice of the Holy Spirit, whatever these people have said.
Right,
You know, and in fact, it's not. It's simply the voice of Corinthian culture.
right, right,
So that's I mean,
right,
your point is just absolutely spot on. I think that's our fear. That's both of our fears.
right.
That we're simply witnessing here in the Bologna approach is a capitulation.
Yeah, it's stepping back from the whole thing. I've been doing a lot of this lately, just stepping back and just trying to get a larger picture on this, both historically and geographically and time and space and all that sort of stuff. It's like, what are we doing? Like seriously, like it just strikes me as a total waste of time. A total waste of time. Like I really do say that, and I'm trying not to be a jerk about this, but it's like it just seems dumb.
Yeah, and it's also a lot of it is I'm as opposed as the next person to a hyper papalism and centralism and so on. But I also wrote a blog that was kind of said it was called The Myth of Hyper Papalism, because you can look at it from another perspective and say, yeah, the papacy in this photogenic media age of ours does have a visibility that it has rarely had in history. Sure.
Yeah.
And it has taken on a kind of oracular importance that it's never had in history before. Nevertheless, 99% of Catholics in the world don't really give a damn what the Pope said on an airplane yesterday, and may not even know what the Pope said on an airplane yesterday. The fact is that the papal magisterium is not exactly absolutely central to the spiritual lives of the vast, vast, vast majority of Catholics. In fact, tons of Catholics just summarily ignore whatever it is that the Pope teaches. And so I'm also not really all that convinced that the church is as centralized, in other words, as the proponents of synodality say it is. On one sense, the Pope appoints all the bishops and all that kind of stuff. But really, is the church really that centered in the papacy? And you look at the actual lived life of the church, the way Catholics actually live.
But the church makes certain very real and charged claims about itself in this regard, Larry. And this is one of my personal struggles, and they've been, this has been a long going process. But, if you trace it back from Vatican II and into Vatican I and even into, Trent, it's hard to pretend otherwise that the church. Look, if I weren't Catholic and I were just sort of looking at this as I look at everything else, I was looking at this as if it were merely a story, I might be inclined to say something to the effect of, wow, those guys really made some claims about themselves that I'm not so sure they can back up. I go back 100, 200, 300 years. It's like, man, that's quite they got aggressive.
Yeah, this is a whole conversation, Kale, that we'll probably have to save for another day about the papacy.
Right.
I mean, that's what you're talking about. Yeah. Or just, the issue of the church's indefectibility, her infallibility. Right. These are very, very thorny issues, given the fact that anybody that knows anything, like you were just alluding to, it's a sort of real history, knows that there's a disconnect between that real history and some of these claims about the pure, rock solid, infallible, unchanging Catholic Church. As I have exposed in a couple of blog posts and others too, not just me, I don't want to be arrogant. This is a mythology. This too, by the way, is a kind of ecclesiastical coping mechanism.
Totally. Yeah.
It was the church's way of coping with first the Reformation, then the Scientific Revolution, then the Enlightenment, then the demise of confessional states and the rise of French-style laicite.
Just politics in Europe in, the 1850s. Like, hello,
Tell me that Pius IX through Pius X weren't condemning democracy left and right simply because the papal states were withering away. And you could no longer count as a sin in confession piracy on papal waters. and things like that. That was actually in an old confession
Amazing.
book. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
examination. Right. Have you committed piracy on papal waters? Well, I'd like to.
Yeah, boy,
no.
it sounds enticing, but
yeah, you know, so this modern Catholics need to get their minds around the fact that this was the cultural political milieu in which the modern papacy has arisen, in this matrix of tension, violence, conflict, controversy. What constitutes power versus what constitutes authority. Right. And in many ways, in the midst of that, actually, the dogma of papal infallibility and stuff is kind of mild compared to what some people wanted. Yeah. And it's actually one of the reasons why Vatican II eventually then even gets called, because Vatican I was abruptly interrupted by Italian revolutionary politics. And so they define the dogma of infallibility, but then it's never nuanced properly with the discussion of, well, what are the roles of other bishops then? And what is collegiality? And so Vatican II was essentially called to sort of complete Vatican I. But my point would be, in answer to your very astute observation, is that this question is not yet resolved.
Right, right.
This is ongoing. I mean, and it's a question that great people like Steve Skojec have raised, you know, and yeah. I mean, I sadly, I think he's left the faith in some sense, maybe not notionally, but kinetically. Yeah. You know.
Well, there are real questions, you know, that I think have to be sorted out, and you know, but yeah, maybe that's a whole hour and a half for another time. So, you know. Yeah.
In fact, we've been going for about an hour and 35 minutes, so we should probably. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to leave here? We never got around to talking Rod Dreher. Maybe we could do another show.
No, we can do that next time. That's fine. I mean, I just, you know, this what I'm trying to do with the underneath here is to get there, is to try to understand, like even thinking through the image of understanding, like literally just sort of stand under to get to the underneath, to get to the currents that move and animate, you know, what we are sorting through right now. I mean, this is, I think, an attempt that we're trying to do here. So that's what I'm trying to do. So.
And I would highly encourage everyone watching this, either on YouTube or on YouTube via my blog, to Google the underneath. If I was tech savvy, I'd be one of those kind of YouTube guys that could do links and say, here's the, you know, I have this little switch over here on my software, live webinar. It says switch to content. And so maybe I'll learn how to do this one of these days so I could link stuff like that. Yeah, I see this all the time. People saying, oh, I'll link it below in my comments. I go, well,
I'll show you how to do it.
I wish the hell well, you could show me, and also I could even have my own blog, gaudiumetspes22.com, posted on here. But I'm a complete Luddite, despite appearances.
You're doing great. So. You're doing great, Larry. This is good
stuff. Hey, Kale, thank you for this conversation.
My pleasure.
Hang on a second. As I always say.